And the day my sister tossed me out of the showroom like trash, laughing, calling me just a nobody. She had no clue I was the new owner. No clue the building she stood in, the desk she sat behind, was mine. But this wasn't just about a title or a deed. It was about the years she erased me. The father we both loved, whose legacy she tried to rewrite. The family that watched her do it, and stayed silent. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just waited. So when I said one sentence, and she froze, stammering, "Boss? Tell me, was it cruel that I didn't smile? Or kind that I didn't say what I really wanted to?" Before we begin, what time are you listening to this and where are you tuning in from? Let us know below. I want to know who's hearing this story because it's one they'll never forget. The air bit through my coat as I stepped out of my car. January in Ohio always had a way of feeling colder than it should, like even the wind was disappointed to be here. I pulled the collar tighter, then looked up at the big white letters on the building. Ronalyn Auto Group. 12 years. I hadn't been back in 12 years. Back then, I was just the girl with a broom, sweeping dust off the showroom tiles on Saturdays while Dad worked deals, and my sister Vera stood at his side taking notes, flashing smiles. I'd be the one fetching coffee, organizing folders, wiping down glass doors. Never once did they think I was watching, learning. Never once did they ask if I wanted to be part of it. Now I stood in the same parking lot, older, quieter, no makeup, no designer bag. My coat was clean but plain, and the sedan I drove in wouldn't turn heads even if it was on fire. I wasn't here for show, I was here for something else. I walked in. The dealership hadn't changed. Same fake plants, same polished tiles, same smell of stale coffee and commission breath. No one recognized me. I wasn't surprised. In their eyes, I was long gone. A young receptionist looked up from her desk. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I gave her a small smile. "I'm here for the 2:30. She blinked. "One sec." Before she could even finish dialing, the glass door to the sales office swung open. Vera. Her heels clicked against the tile like gunshots. Same stiff posture, same cold eyes. Her hair was perfectly straight, not a strand out of place. She stopped in front of me, squinted, and tilted her head like I was something stuck to her shoe. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice tight, rehearsed. I answered gently, "I'm here for the 2:30 appointment." A second passed, her lips curled. "Oh," she chuckled, turning slightly to speak to a salesman behind her. "Looks like someone wandered in from the shelter." Then louder, for the whole floor to hear, "We don't do pity hires, sweetheart. And if you're here for a handout, you're at the wrong counter. This isn't a soup kitchen." Laughter. Low, polite chuckles. Some fake, some real. I stayed still. "I have an appointment," I repeated. She raised an eyebrow. "With who?" I held her gaze. "Security," she called over her shoulder. "Can someone please escort this woman out before she starts sobbing or pitching a tent in the waiting area?" A tall man in a dealership polo walked toward me. People were watching now. A couple with a toddler froze by the vending machines. One of the mechanics peeked in from the service hallway. I could hear whispers. I didn't fight. I nodded politely to the security guy, turned, and walked back out into the cold. She didn't even look me in the eye. She hadn't changed one bit. Outside, I made it to my car, but I didn't get in. I just leaned against the door, letting the wind hit me. My hands trembled, not from the cold. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small brass key. The edges were worn, the ridges smooth from years of being turned, forgotten, rediscovered. Not for the car, for the office. I remembered the day my father gave it to me. I was 18, standing in that same office Vera just strutted out of. "Someday," he whispered, "this will all be yours too." He hadn't known he'd get sick, that Vera would twist everything, but I hadn't forgotten the key. I closed my fingers around it now, and said softly, "Let's begin." 5 minutes later, inside the dealership, Vera was laughing with a client when a manager hurried in holding a crisp envelope. "Corporate line just called," he said, voice hushed. She frowned, took the envelope, read the contents, and her smile drained away. The paper trembled in her hand. She turned slowly, like the air had thickened around her. Then she walked outside, and saw me, standing there, waiting. The cold hit her first. Vera stepped outside, pulling her blazer tight across her chest as the wind bit through the fabric. She looked annoyed, probably expecting to see a disgruntled customer or some low-level employee too afraid to speak inside, but instead, she saw me. I was still there, right where I'd been standing 5 minutes ago. Calm, still, watching. Vera's eyes narrowed as she crossed the short stretch of pavement toward me. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice flat but tense. I didn't answer. The rumble of tires over gravel pulled her attention away. A sleek silver SUV came into view, its tinted windows reflecting the cloudy Ohio sky. It slid into the dealership's front spot, the one labeled "Reserved for Owner." Two men stepped out in sharp coats, the kind that didn't belong to car salesmen or even regional managers. These were corporate. Vera turned, puzzled. "What's going on?" The taller of the two men approached me first. He smiled gently as he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a folder. "Congratulations, Ms. Evers," he said loud enough for Vera to hear. "As of this morning, the transfer is complete. The dealership is now officially under your control." I took the folder in silence. Vera stared at us like the words hadn't landed. Then, slowly, her expression twisted into disbelief. "Wait, what?" She glanced from the executive to me. Her voice raised slightly. "This has to be some kind of mistake. A joke." The other man stepped forward. "It's not a joke. You can check the documentation yourself." Vera let out a forced laugh. "She's not even in the company system. You don't just walk in and take over a business like this." The taller man cleared his throat. "She didn't walk in. Ms. Evers owns the parent company. As of 5 weeks ago, she acquired majority shares following the audit review of—" He paused briefly, then added, "certain irregularities." Her face drained of color. I didn't move. "She can't just—" Vera started again, her voice high-pitched now. "You can't just come in here and act like you're somebody." I finally spoke. "I'm not acting." I held up the document for her to see. "I am." We stood there in silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. I turned to walk toward the glass doors of the dealership. I didn't need to ask her to follow. She did, like a ghost trailing behind, her heels clicking too loudly on the concrete. Inside, the showroom felt different. People had gathered behind desks, by service counters, and near the coffee machine, eyes wide, whispering. A mechanic wiping his hands on a rag leaned toward another employee. "Isn't that the founder's youngest daughter?" Someone else muttered, "No way, she left forever ago." I walked past them without acknowledging a word. The walk was deliberate. My coat swayed with each step, and I didn't look back. We reached the manager's office, once my father's. It had been redecorated, but the bones were still the same. The oak desk, the filing cabinet dented near the bottom, the window looking out toward the used lot. I opened the door. The smell hit me first. Leather, old paper, and a faint trace of the cologne Dad used to wear. I stepped in, closing the door behind me. Vera hovered just outside like a shadow. My fingers brushed the edge of the desk. I paused a moment, then opened the top drawer. Inside, tucked beneath a layer of business cards and paper clips, was the watch. His watch, the same one he wore every day until the year he passed. I didn't say anything, just closed my fingers around it and slipped it into my coat pocket. When I turned, Vera was watching me, pale, angry, scared. "What happens now?" she asked. The bravado was gone. I walked around the desk and sat in the chair, slowly. Not for effect, just because the weight of it was real. "You're on probation," I said plainly. She blinked. "You're kidding." "No, effective immediately. HR will send you the terms. Misconduct, including what happened earlier, will be reviewed by legal." She shook her head. "You can't humiliate me like this. Not in front of the staff." I looked at her. "You told security to throw me out. In front of clients. You laughed. You made jokes." "That was before you knew who I was," I finished for her. She swallowed. I leaned back. "You don't get to treat people like trash just because you think they're beneath you, Vera. Not anymore." She took a shaky step back, like the air was thinner in the room. I let the silence stretch. Then I turned to the computer on the desk, still logged in. I opened the company email system, drafted a short message, and clicked Send. Subject, Leadership Change, effective today. From Odalis Evers, CEO. It was short, professional, no drama, just facts. When I looked up, Vera was still there. "I didn't come back to hurt anyone," I said, "but I also didn't come back to stay silent." She didn't answer. She just stared, and I knew, for the first time in years, she was starting to see me clearly. I didn't come back to hurt anyone, but I also didn't come back to stay silent. That night, long after the last taillight blinked out of the dealership parking lot, I sat alone in the CEO office, the office that used to belong to my father. The only light came from the desk lamp and the dull glow of the computer screen. I'd kicked off my shoes hours ago, curled my feet up on the worn leather chair, and surrounded myself with files that smelled of neglect. Most were untouched. Others were stained with old coffee rings, still bearing the imprint of Vera's short temper. I started by changing every single password on the system, admin access, payroll, even the thermostat. Then I opened a drawer and began tossing out the junk she'd left behind, expired business cards, half-used lip gloss, and 3 different World's Best Boss mugs still in their packaging. Near midnight, I paused over a stack of emails that had never been opened. Customer complaints, questions from vendors, a flagged message from legal titled Urgent Audit Findings that had been marked unread for over a month. And then I saw it, a framed photo, tucked into the back of a lower drawer, turned face down. It was the original team. The day the first dealership opened. Dad in the center, surrounded by his earliest hires. And off to the far left, where I knew I should have been, there was a noticeable crop mark. The image was uneven, jagged. Someone had cut me out, not metaphorically, literally. I held it for a beat, then fed it to the shredder, slow and steady, listening to the blades chew through what little illusion I had left. The next morning, the dealership stirred to life. Mechanics rolled open bay doors, phones began ringing. I greeted the receptionist and made my way to the finance office, coffee in hand, with an unreadable expression. Inside, Darla, the finance lead, sat rigid at her desk. She looked up and swallowed quickly. "I saw the announcement," she said, voice low. "Congratulations." Or, "Welcome back." I nodded. "Thank you, Darla. I wanted to go over something I noticed in the books." Her eyes darted to her screen. "The discrepancy?" I raised a brow. "So you saw it too?" "Of course. We all did," she whispered. "But when I brought it to Vera, she told me to drop it, said it was a temporary adjustment." "What exactly are we talking about?" She turned her monitor to me. Line after line of payments, lease returns, consultant fees. "There's $138,000 unaccounted for over the last 2 quarters, most of it filtered through a shell LLC, Trinity Growth Partners. No one's ever met the consultants it lists, and there are discounts issued to vehicles that never went through service." I narrowed my eyes. Was she stealing from the company? Darla hesitated, then leaned in. "We were afraid to ask, but yes, we all suspected something. No one dared speak it out loud." Back upstairs, I sat at the desk, my desk now, and stared out the window for a long time. Traffic flowed past on the main road. Inside, the quiet felt like it was waiting to explode. A file drawer in the corner caught my eye. Vera's old private cabinet, the one she used to snap shut anytime someone walked in. I got up, pulled the master key from my pocket, and unlocked it. Inside, there was chaos disguised as filing, misplaced forms, stale coffee receipts. But near the back, a folder caught my eye, bright red with bold handwriting, "Do not touch." Of course I touched it. Inside, a non-disclosure agreement, barely a few months old. The name at the bottom made my chest tighten, Luis Ortega, a technician who'd been fired last winter. I remembered him vaguely. Nice guy. Quiet. Always respectful. The complaint form attached, unsigned, accused him of harassment. But from the wording and the date, it didn't add up. The NDA confirmed it. Luis had been paid to keep quiet. Not because he did something wrong, but because he was about to expose something. Possibly her. There were more letters in the drawer. Former employees who'd tried to report issues. Documents Vera never submitted. Warnings that were ignored. I copied every single page, scanned them into my encrypted drive, and returned them exactly where they were. By dusk, my head was pounding. I stepped outside for air, wrapped in a coat against the growing chill. That's when I saw her. Vera was standing in the far end of the parking lot, half in shadow, speaking to a man I recognized instantly. Silas Grant. My father's old rival. A man who once sued us over a dealership location dispute and nearly bankrupted our expansion. He handed her a manila folder. They didn't hug, didn't shake hands, just exchanged something that didn't feel like paperwork. It felt like an agreement. I stayed in my car, out of sight. I didn't say a word. But the next morning, when I unlocked my office, something had shifted. The photo of my father that sat beside my monitor was lying on the floor. The frame cracked, glass fractured into a spider web of shards. At first I thought maybe it had fallen, but nothing else had moved, not even the pen beside it. And taped to my computer screen was a single piece of paper, typed, no signature. It read, "Don't dig up the past." I stared at it for a long moment, then I peeled it off, folded it once, and tucked it into my pocket. Because I wasn't the one who buried the past, Vera was. The office lights flickered gently as I stepped into the executive wing the next morning. The hallway smelled like synthetic citrus, freshly cleaned. Someone had tried to make everything feel normal again. I knew better. Vera arrived exactly 3 minutes after I did, dressed in her signature camel coat, clutching 2 coffees from the cafe across the street. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks across the tile. "Truce?" she said lightly, holding out a cup like nothing had happened. I took it, smiled back. "Sure." I didn't drink it. She walked ahead of me, shoulders squared like she still owned the place. I watched the back of her neck, tense, stiff. People underestimate what tension says. and how much silence can hear. That afternoon, while most of the staff headed to lunch, I stayed behind. I kept the blinds half open, just enough to watch for movement, but not enough to invite questions. After making sure the hallway was clear, I slipped a small motion-activated camera behind the potted ficus near the bookshelf, angled just enough to catch the desk and cabinet behind me. She wasn't going to play clean, and I didn't intend to play blind. The next morning, Human Resources forwarded me another anonymous complaint. Unlike the first, which had been vague and snide, this one was detailed, venomous, and oddly specific. It accused me of creating an emotionally unsafe environment, citing witnesses from sales. One name jumped out, a junior associate who had just completed onboarding 2 months ago, someone who'd never once been in a private meeting with me. I forwarded the email to myself, locked the door, and picked up the intercom line. "Tracy, can you bring me HR files from the last 12 months, full case logs, no summaries?" There was a pause, then a quiet, "Yes, Ms. Kinner." An hour later, 3 thick folders landed on my desk. No one asked why I wanted them. No one dared. I combed through each one, looking not just for issues but for patterns. And they were there, buried under vague language and administrative reassignments. One was about a parts tech named Melissa. Filed a complaint about verbal harassment from a team lead. No follow-up. Just a note. Transferred to West Side Branch. Mutually agreed. Another, almost identical, with a different woman. Same outcome. The files weren't just mishandled. They were managed. For silence. I laid the last folder flat, picked up my phone, and took pictures of each page. There's a kind of rage that doesn't yell. It catalogs. That afternoon, I left through the west stairwell and took the side exit no one uses. The cold air bit at my skin as I crossed the lot to Gerald Reese's office, our father's former corporate lawyer, retired now mostly, but not out of the game. His receptionist looked startled to see me. "Ms. Kinner? Is he in?" Gerald stepped out before she could answer. "Odellis, of course, come." His office smelled like old oak and printer toner. We sat near the window, the blinds drawn against the sun. I handed him a stack of copied files without a word. When he saw Vera's signature on the suppression paperwork, he didn't even blink. "She asked me to bury some documents years ago," he said eventually. 5 years? Maybe 6. I didn't speak. "Your father didn't know," Gerald added. "I never told him. I should have." I slid him another envelope, everything from the filing cabinet. "I need a silent audit, legal, financial, all of it." Gerald leaned back. "This will cost her everything." "She already spent it." I left his office with a copy of our bylaws in my purse and a sinking certainty in my chest. By the time evening settled, the city glowed with quiet luxury, amber streetlights, the hum of tires over wet pavement. I stopped at a local grocery for some basics. Just as I was unlocking my condo door, I heard a voice behind me. "Odellis?" I turned. Vera stood there, holding a bottle of Pinot Noir and a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought we could talk, like old times. She followed me in before I could answer. I set down my bag, nodded toward the couch. "Make yourself comfortable." She handed me the wine like it was an olive branch. "I know we've been tense," she began, "but we're sisters. This doesn't have to be a battle." She crossed one leg over the other, smoothing her skirt like it was her nerves she was flattening. "I just think, maybe you're overwhelmed. That's okay. You weren't trained for this, Odie. You never wanted it." She said, "Odie," like it was a leash. "I can handle the day-to-day," she went on. "If you'd sign over some voting shares, I'll deal with the legal stuff, the pressure, the meetings. You can keep your title. Just let me handle the weight." I didn't reply, just watched her hand twitch as she reached for her glass. Left thumb kept brushing against the rim, like it was testing her own lie. She stood to go not long after. "Think about it," she said at the door, voice syrupy. "No one needs to get hurt." After she left, I poured the wine down the sink. Then I examined the cork. There was a faint notch, barely visible. I split it with a paring knife. Inside was a soft capsule, half dissolved. Not poison. I'd seen these in college, used in clubs to cloud judgment. Enough to slow someone down. Make them suggestible. I sat in my office the next morning and rewound the camera footage from the day before. She'd come in early, before I arrived, stood at my desk for several seconds too long, smiled into the empty room, brushed the edge of the drawer, then slowly opened it. Just a crack. Pretended to sneeze. Closed it again. Walked out. And yet she had the audacity to hug me goodbye later that night, right over the same drawer. The note on my desk still sat in my briefcase. "Don't dig up the past." She didn't know I had already contacted the board. The meeting wasn't supposed to start for another 30 minutes, but I was already seated at the far end of the boardroom table. I wanted every chair filled while I sat still, centered, silent, immovable. Not hiding, not reacting. Through the thick pane of glass behind me, the sun poured into the room in wide golden slats. The kind of light that made people feel safe. But nothing about today was safe. Vera walked in late, but still managed to act like she owned the place. She flashed that politician smile, clipped and composed, and greeted the board like she'd invited them over for cocktails. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she said, brushing invisible lint from her blazer. She didn't look at me, not directly, but I watched the moment she noticed the envelopes, one per seat, each sealed with the company crest, each containing pages of what I had quietly gathered over 4 days: records, dates, testimony, internal memos Vera had signed herself, and most damning, financial statements she'd altered, covered up, and forged. The board members exchanged glances before opening them. Paper rustled, brows furrowed. That smile of hers? It cracked. "Let's begin," I said, finally raising my voice, calm, controlled. "I didn't call this meeting. Vera did. So, go ahead, Vera. You wanted the floor." She hesitated for half a second, then exhaled through her nose like it was just another inconvenience. "This is a witch hunt," she began, shaking her head. "Let's be honest. Odellis has had issues with me since we were children. She's using the company as a weapon. This is personal." A low cough came from the right. Mr. Redenbaugh, former CEO of 3 multi-state firms including ours, now retired but still holding voting power as an advisory member. "I reviewed everything last night," he said, tapping his finger against his envelope. "This isn't personal, Vera. This is systemic fraud. 5 years of it. Patterns, payouts, cover-ups." Her eyes darted to mine. For the first time, I saw fear. "I don't know what you think you found," she started again, voice higher now, "but none of it proves I—" Another board member, Ms. Lyle from compliance, cut in. "Vera, you falsified quarterly reports, you reassigned whistleblowers, you authorized hush settlements without full documentation, and you did it under your own login." "You don't get to lecture me," Vera barked, her voice now brittle, her charm gone. Redenbaugh raised a hand. "Let's move to a vote." It wasn't even close. 5-2. Vera was stripped of her executive powers. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, final. She stood up slowly, as if the air had changed, and she was struggling to breathe. "You think this is the end?" she said, her eyes locked on mine. "You don't know what you've started." I didn't respond. I just watched her leave. But I knew better than to believe she was done. Later that afternoon, I met with my private legal team in a quiet office 3 blocks from headquarters. Gerald, the former family attorney who'd once cleaned up behind Vera, now worked beside me. The room smelled like legal pads and cold coffee, but the tension was sharp, clean. We spread the documents across the table: misappropriated funds, non-disclosure agreements Vera had signed but never logged, audio transcripts I hadn't yet released. We're going to file for breach of fiduciary duty," I said, tapping the motion draft. "And obstruction." Gerald nodded. "We'll need to move fast if we want to freeze her remaining stock, before she cashes out or moves it under someone else's name." "She'll retaliate," I said, not a question. "She will," he replied. "That's when we release the audio." The audio. It was short, less than 3 minutes. But in that time, Vera had admitted to manipulating board votes, burying misconduct claims, and bribing an auditor. I hadn't sent it to anyone yet, but it existed. And she knew it. We finished the session with signatures, timestamps, and encrypted backups. Everything by the book, everything clean. That evening, I returned home just as dusk pulled shadows across my condo windows. The building was quiet, tucked off a side street in the older part of the city. I preferred it that way, private, anonymous. I pushed open my door and paused. There, taped at eye level, was a photo. A faded Polaroid, edges curled, colors softened by time. It was me, 14 years old, standing off to the side in a pale yellow dress, holding a balloon. Smiling, but barely. Behind me, Vera and our father stood in hard hats, shovels in hand, laughing at the dealership's groundbreaking ceremony. I wasn't invited to the actual photo. Someone had snapped me watching. The pain came back like muscle memory. I remembered that day. Vera whispering, "You're just not built for this world, Odie. You're too soft." And my father placing a hand on my shoulder, saying gently, "This isn't your path, darling. You'll find your own." But it had never felt like a path. It had felt like a locked gate. I closed the door behind me and carried the photo into the kitchen, laid it on the counter. Then I opened my email draft folder. There it was, a message I'd written to Vera the night before. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it had been softer. Something I'd written in a moment of hesitation, maybe even guilt. I read it once more, then I deleted it, permanently. Because she'd left that photo for a reason, not as nostalgia, as warning, a reminder. Or worse, a threat wrapped in sentiment. But she didn't know what else was already in motion. She didn't know the lawsuit was filed. She didn't know the audit team had arrived this morning under a different name. She didn't know I had already contacted the board. But I wasn't the only one building a case. That realization didn't land like a bomb. It slipped in quietly, wrapped in the cold blue light of my laptop screen at 6:13 a.m. I had just returned from my early walk, coffee still steaming beside me, when the notification blinked. One new secure message. No subject, no sender. I hesitated, clicked. Inside was a single line of text. She never saw me. And below that, 2 attachments. One was grainy surveillance footage, time-stamped and tagged inside our Dallas location's payroll office. Vera's face clear as daylight, signing off on a cash envelope handed to a man who didn't work for us. The second file was a spreadsheet, simple but damning. Expenses linked to Vera's special clients, all funneled from company funds through ghost accounts. I sat back, blinking slowly. My first instinct was distrust. Could have been a setup, or bait. But the detail, the format of the file names, the handwriting on the form, the internal memos, it was too accurate. And that message, she never saw me. Whoever this was, they weren't bluffing. Later that morning, I found myself driving through light traffic toward a small cafe tucked behind an old post office on 8th and Hudson. The encrypted email had included one more thing, a time and address. I parked across the street, watched for a few minutes, nothing suspicious. Just a woman in a beige coat sitting at a corner table with a manila envelope on the seat beside her. I stepped inside. She looked up and smiled faintly. Odellis. It took me a second to place her. Blair? She nodded. You remembered. Blair was Vera's executive assistant for nearly 7 years. Always quiet, always typing, always there, but invisible. I kept my head down for a long time, she said after we ordered, but I've seen everything. She slid the envelope toward me. I waited until we were both holding coffee in our hands before I opened it. Inside, a thumb drive, handwritten notes on staff terminations, 3 photos of Vera at a resort with a client she later accused of harassment after he threatened to go public. Why now? I asked. Blair didn't flinch. Because you're the first one who didn't look through me. I sat there for a moment, letting that land. You could have gone to the press. I don't want a spotlight, she said. I want her gone. And I want you to know, she never treated you like a sister. But I watched. You never once spoke to her the way she spoke to you. We parted ways with no promises. Just a quiet nod. So... And on the drive back, I took the long way. Somewhere between the cafe and home, I made a turn I hadn't made in over a decade, right onto a cracked stretch of pavement lined with chain-link fences and faded signage. The old dealership, the first lot I ever worked. It looked abandoned now. A for-lease banner hung crookedly across the facade, flapping against broken glass. I pulled over and just stared. The memory came uninvited. Vera, heels clicking, voice sharp, berating me in front of a customer for parking a sedan crooked. You'll never make it off the lot, sis. Back then, I believed her. But as I sat in my newer model Lexus with the custom leather interior and dealership plates bearing my initials, I murmured under my breath, I did. I didn't linger long. From there, I drove straight to our estate office, a modest building behind the family's larger real estate firm, tucked near suburban Waxahachie. The air was thick with heat and quiet, the kind of place where the blinds always stay half shut, and the records smell faintly of dust and lemon polish. I'd come to review inheritance archives, something I'd requested weeks ago. The staffer on duty handed me 2 boxes. The first was full of expected paperwork, tax returns, property ledgers, lease agreements. But the second box, that's where it happened. At the very bottom, beneath a layer of yellowing file dividers, I found a sealed folder marked in red ink, M.W. Private Trust. Amendments. M.W. stood for my uncle, Martin Walton. Vera always dismissed him as the eccentric one, but I remembered how he used to ruffle my hair and whisper, "Don't tell Vera, but I think you're the smart one." Inside the folder were deed records, land surveys, transaction histories, notarized affidavits, and one sheet that made my breath catch. Land title, 1876 Eastfield BLVD, flagship dealership. Beneficiary, Odellis Walton. I reread it twice. She never transferred it. She assumed, like always, assumed it was hers, assumed no one else was looking. But my uncle had kept it dormant, never refiled, never touched. Just waiting. I ran my fingers down the line of print. The foundation of her empire, the showroom she hosted governors in, the building she used as leverage in our board negotiations, stood on land in my name. She built her kingdom on a stage she doesn't own, I whispered. 100 thoughts ran through me. Legal angles, strategic leaks, title assertions. But beneath all that was something deeper. Not revenge, not even justice. It was truth. The quiet kind. The kind you don't announce, but simply let unfold. I closed the folder gently. This time I wouldn't ask for permission. I wouldn't apologize. And for once, I was the one keeping secrets. The weight of the folder in my lap felt heavier than it should have. I sat still in my car outside the courthouse, the morning sun filtering through the windshield, cutting light across the envelope that held it all. I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I just looked straight ahead and whispered to myself, time to move. The motion I filed wasn't loud, no press, no headlines, just a quiet, calculated strike. Through my attorney, I submitted a formal injunction, requesting immediate legal halt to any financial transactions involving the land under the flagship dealership. My land. My name. The judge reviewed the documents and set a hearing date without delay. No pushback, no red tape, just the law doing what it should have done decades ago. And still, Vera hadn't caught wind. Not yet. She was too busy grinning in boardrooms, thinking the world still belonged to her. Let her smile. I'd take that smile apart one layer at a time. Later that night, I sat at my dining table, the glow of my laptop bathing the room in soft white. I opened a burner email and attached exactly what needed to be seen. Documents, screenshots, dates, signatures. The kind of proof no PR firm could whitewash. I sent it straight to the Houston Ledger, one of the largest business publications in Texas. By dawn, the headline was everywhere. Top dealership empire facing ownership lawsuit, family insider strikes back. That was the exact line, sharp, clean, brutal. It was like watching a match hit gasoline. Within hours, appointments at the dealership were dropping. One of their major parts suppliers issued a public pause on operations, pending clarity on ownership disputes. Phones must have been ringing off the hook. Mine rang just after 10. Romy. I didn't answer right away. I let it buzz. Twice. 3 times. Then picked up like I had nothing better to do. Odalis, what the hell do you think you're doing? Her voice cracked like someone who'd been pacing for hours. Hi to you too, I replied calmly. Didn't expect a call from you. You usually save that for when you're screaming in a staff meeting. This is serious, she barked. You're sabotaging everything Dad built. No, I said flatly. I'm just reclaiming what he thought he could bury. Funny thing about lies, they rot under pressure. You think this is funny? No, I said, then paused. Not yet. I ended the call. The next morning, before most had their coffee, I was already parked outside the main lot. The air smelled like rain and tension. I stepped out of my car and walked the cracked sidewalk like I'd never been gone. The building loomed, newer windows but same bones. I stepped inside, the receptionist startled, unsure if she should greet me or call security. I'm not here to cause trouble, I told her. Just wanted to say hi. Behind the counter, a man with gray at his temples stepped out from the hallway. It was Carl, one of the last remaining employees from my first years here. His eyes lit up with surprise, then softened. I'll be damned. Odalis. Hey, Carl, I smiled. Still keeping this place afloat? Trying, he said, though lately, feels like we're sinking. A few others gathered, whispering. I looked around at faces I hadn't seen in 20 years. Older, maybe a little tired, but I saw the same loyalty that Vera never deserved. You all deserved better, I said gently, and I'm sorry it took this long. Before anyone could respond, the glass doors hissed open. Vera walked in, heels clicking, blazer pressed, hair pulled taut like always. She stopped mid-step when she saw me leaning against the front desk, casual as ever. She froze. What are you doing here? She hissed. I straightened. Oh, just visiting old friends. You know, some of us actually remember where we came from. You're not supposed to be here. I tilted my head. Funny. I never left. You were just too busy looking down to notice. The tension thickened. Employees behind her exchanged glances but stayed quiet. I didn't need a scene. I'll see myself out, I said, giving Carl a soft nod. But before I reached the door, a man in a blue windbreaker and messenger bag stepped in. Vera Marin? She turned, annoyed. What now? He handed her a thick envelope. You've been served. Have a good day. She opened it right there in the entryway. Her face, red at first, went pale by the second page, then completely hollow. One sentence stood bold, boxed in legal print. Rightful beneficiary of property deed, Odalis Marin. She looked up, stunned, but I wasn't there anymore. I was already stepping into my car, windows up, engine humming. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call, just a video. Romy had posted it. It was the moment Vera opened the letter, captured in crisp HD from behind a potted plant in the lobby, captioned, "When your nobody sister becomes your landlord." And below that were comments, hundreds of them, some from ex-employees, some from former customers, all of them saying one thing in their own way. Finally. I didn't smile. Not yet, because I wasn't done, not by a long shot. By the time I pulled into the courthouse parking lot that morning, my palms were dry, my breath steady, not calm exactly, but focused. After everything I'd been through, I had learned not to confuse quiet with weakness. Today wasn't about shouting, it was about truth, and finally letting it speak louder than anything they'd tried to bury. The steps up to the courthouse felt oddly light under my heels. Maybe because this time, I wasn't the one running. I was walking straight into the fire, and not one part of me flinched. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. People whispered in tight clumps. Former mechanics from the dealership, nosy neighbors, a couple journalists from the local business press. Even two of the receptionists from the lot were there, faces tight with anticipation. Vera made her entrance like it was the Met Gala. Diamond studs, black tailored suit, a silk scarf she probably thought made her look refined. She walked in flanked by her lawyer, some guy with gelled hair and the personality of an empty room. Her heels clicked too loudly, as if she wanted the whole room to notice her before anything else. Her eyes found me, and for a second, just a flicker, her mouth tightened, but she recovered quickly, tossed her hair back, and gave me a look that said, "Poor thing still thinks she's got a shot." I didn't blink. My own attorney, quiet, middle-aged, the kind of man who wore reading glasses on a chain, leaned in and said softly, "Just answer what's asked, don't volunteer more than you need to." I nodded once. "I'm ready." "All rise," the bailiff called. We stood. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, entered without fanfare, adjusted her robes, and looked over the docket. "This is case number 28-132, Marin versus Marin regarding property rights and land trust dispute. Both parties present?" My lawyer spoke first, then Vera's. The judge glanced down at the file, nodded, and said, "Let's begin." The first hour was a slow build. Documents. Dates. My father's signed revisions to the original property agreement were entered into the record, his signature verified by a forensic specialist. The notarized trust amendment was projected onto the courtroom monitor, showing my name clearly as sole beneficiary of the land the dealership sat on. Vera pretended to be unbothered, but she kept adjusting the clasp on her bracelet. Her attorney objected 3 times, once claiming the documents were ambiguous in intent. The judge raised an eyebrow. "The language is clear. The trust amendment states, 'I hereby bequeath full rights and ownership of the dealership lot located at 512 Harding Avenue to my daughter, Odalis Marin.'" "What's ambiguous about that?" he stammered. Vera avoided my eyes. Then came the surprise. A retired accountant named Mr. Delaney, who had worked with our family for over 2 decades, stepped up as our final witness. He looked directly at the judge. I was there when her father called me into his office, weeks before he passed. He told me directly. He wanted Odalis to have the land, not for sentiment, but because she was the only one who had ever shown she could take care of it. "Did you make a record of this?" I documented it in the quarterly notes, filed it with the trust's lawyer before Ms. Vera Marin had him removed. Gasps broke out across the gallery. The judge's voice cut through it. "Ms. Marin," she said, addressing Vera directly, "were you ever granted formal deed ownership of the property in question?" Vera hesitated. Then she smiled, tight, too wide, and said, I was under the impression the land was already part of the dealership's assets." The judge tilted her head. "But were you ever granted deed or title in your name?" Vera opened her mouth again. Her lawyer interrupted. "Objection, Your Honor. Client is being asked to make legal assumptions." "Overruled," the judge said crisply. "No," Vera mumbled. "I wasn't." Silence settled. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. And then, from the 3rd row of the gallery, someone stood up. Romy. She walked forward calmly, laptop in hand. "Your Honor, with permission, I have a video file I'd like to submit. It's relevant. Very relevant." Vera's face went pale. "Absolutely not. She's not on record." The judge leaned back. "Let's see what it is." Romy turned the screen toward the projection system. And there it was. Footage from the dealership's office 5 years ago. Vera on camera, laughing with one of the finance managers. The sound was clear. "She'll never know what I did with the land," Vera was saying. "Odalis is too soft to fight back. Always has been." More laughter. "She can have her little books and her quiet life. I got the legacy." The room erupted. Vera sprang from her seat. "You little traitor!" she screamed at Romy. I stood frozen, eyes locked on her. That voice, so smug, so certain. She had really thought she'd buried me. The judge slammed her gavel. "Enough!" she barked. "One more outburst like that, and you'll be escorted out." Vera sat, jaw clenched, cheeks blotchy with red. The rest moved quickly. The judge reviewed everything once more, then folded her hands. "This court finds that the property at 512 Harding Avenue is legally and solely owned by Odalis Marin. Ms. Vera Marin is ordered to vacate within 30 calendar days. Furthermore, she will be liable for retroactive rent payments dating back to the date of her assumption of unauthorized control. I didn't gloat, didn't look at Vera, didn't smirk. I just stood, nodded once to the judge, and gathered my things. As I stepped out of the courtroom, the buzz of whispered voices swirled behind me. My footsteps were quiet, but firm. And then, as I reached the hallway, I heard someone murmur just loud enough for it to reach me. She was always the quiet one. But look who just walked out owning everything. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. But what I did next, no court could have prepared them for. 2 weeks passed. Not the kind of weeks that slip by quietly, but the kind that settle into your bones, that peel away the noise and leave only what matters. That morning, I drove back to the dealership, but I didn't park across the street like I used to. I didn't wait for someone to open the door or pretend not to see me. I stepped out of my car, heels clicking on the pavement, and walked straight through the front doors. This time I didn't hesitate. The staff who once avoided eye contact now stood up straighter. One receptionist even reached for her blazer like she'd just realized who I was. Not Odalys, the sister. Not Odalys, the one who got pushed out. But the woman with the deed in her hand. The woman who owned this place. I didn't hold a grudge in my posture. I didn't walk in with a smirk. I just walked in. Like I belonged. Because I did. Vera was in the main office, her face partially turned toward the window. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, she flinched. Not in fear, but in confusion. Maybe guilt. She looked exactly like she did in court, put together but exhausted beneath the surface. "I figured you'd come to fire me," she said, voice clipped. "I didn't," I answered, pulling an envelope from my bag. I walked closer, set it on the desk between us. "This is your severance. It's more than fair." She didn't reach for it. "This place needs healing," I added. "You need space, and I need peace." For the first time, Vera had no rebuttal, no defense, just silence. Romy stood nearby, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes shimmered, and she blinked a little faster than usual. Vera finally looked down at the envelope, not with anger, not with gratitude either. Just stunned, like the math didn't add up. She expected vengeance. What she got was grace. "I won't come back here," she said softly. "I know," I said. And that was that. The next few days were quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not silent, but settled. I went through every department in the dealership, not as a supervisor, but as someone who finally had the keys to shape what came next. I listened more than I spoke, took notes, asked questions, even sat in the break room and shared coffee with the team. Then I started the real work. We brought back Manuel, the head mechanic Vera had let go 3 years ago, because he was too slow and too old. We welcomed back 2 saleswomen who had quit after being passed over for promotions. One of them hugged me and whispered, "This place finally feels human again." I didn't rebuild with noise. I did it the same way I'd survived all those years. Steadily, deliberately, one conversation at a time. We added family days on Saturdays. Employees could bring their kids, show them the cars, eat pizza in the lobby without worrying about messing up the floors. We honored my father's legacy, not just with plaques or speeches, but by making sure no employee felt invisible. A portion of the dealership's profit now goes to fund local vocational programs for girls like I used to be, girls with grit under their nails and big ideas no one takes seriously. One of the younger staff members, Casey, stopped me in the hallway and said, "You turned this place into something more than just cars. It feels like a second chance for all of us." I smiled, but didn't say anything, because sometimes the right words are the ones you let sit quietly. Then came the message from Vera. She asked to meet, one last time. We sat in the back office, the very room where she once told me I was too soft, too quiet, too naive to handle the business. Now she looked older, not in her face but in her eyes. There was no small talk, no coffee between us, just space and history. She folded her hands, then said it straight. "I hated how he looked at you, like you were the better one, like, no matter what I did, I'd never be that." I didn't flinch. "I never needed to be better," I told her. "I just wanted to belong." A long silence passed between us. Heavy, but not bitter. There were no apologies, no tidy closure, just truth. She nodded once, stood up, left without another word. I didn't stop her. The dealership ran like clockwork the next week. Staff settled into their roles, customers returned, and the air in the building didn't carry that invisible weight anymore. One afternoon I found myself alone in my father's old office. The chair still creaked the same way, the drawers were stiff, He never liked fancy cabinets. I opened the top one, expecting old invoices or pens. Instead, I found a photo. Me, 10 years old, covered in grease, smiling like an idiot, crouched beside Dad under the hood of a beat-up truck. Back then, I didn't know what legacy meant. I just knew I liked holding the flashlight for him. I sat down, held the photo, and let it breathe. Turns out, I wasn't just a nobody. I was his daughter. I still am. Do you think I should have made her suffer more? Or was it enough to simply walk away?